Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I am beyond excited today. I have on Glyphosate Girl. Her name is Kelly. I actually stumbled upon her on the internet, but she speaks my language in so many different ways. And for those of you who are not educated quite yet on glyphosate and the harmful factors of it, and then what we can do to prevent getting some of these factors, anyways, we're going to dive in because I know that this conversation is going to be fire and we're going to take so much away. So welcome, Kelly. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to share what I can.
Absolutely. So obviously you didn't wake up at 5 years old and realize that glyphosate was a thing. So how did you stumble into this world of knowing about it, I guess?
Yes, it definitely was not something I knew about at all. Like most people in this world, it's an invisible compound that is found in our food system. And I stumbled upon it because I, like many people, was struggling with my health. And it wasn't the types of symptoms that in general are highly diagnosable, because it was things that seemed vague, even though they were very significant for me. But it was random rashes and exhaustion, like fatigue beyond normal tiredness as a mom. It was eyesight issues, it was digestive problems, it was sinus inflammation, neuropathy, all of these things, nothing to extreme levels, but clearly there were alarms going off in my body. And so what then the conventional medical system does, and I went to a bunch of Stanford trained doctors, and I went to many different specialists here and there, bounced around, and they really had no idea what was wrong with me, because the tests that they were running didn't show that anything was wrong with me. And so they would layer on different medications. So, of course, because I am a woman, their first stop was, I don't see anything in your blood test, so you must be depressed or anxious, and the mind has a lot of control over the body, or it's being presented in physical symptoms. And I didn't really believe that, because my feeling was that I was depressed and anxious because I didn't know what was going on with my health. And I was like,
Right.
these are very real symptoms. I don't think I'm imagining them. But you tend to trust what these highly trained doctors tell you. And I thought, okay, I'll give this a try. So before long, I found myself on two different antidepressants, a benzodiazepine, which, by the way, are horrible to try and come off of, and a steroid and gabapentin. I ended up actually having a hysterectomy and sinus surgery. And I really feel like I exhausted all avenues in conventional mainstream medicine. So I finally was like, I have no answers at all. I am going to go to see a psychiatrist finally, because maybe something's seriously wrong with my head. So I go into the psychiatrist's office, and he's great and he's amazing. I still, I respect him so much, but I haven't been someone that's seen psychiatrists. So I go into the psychiatrist's office, and his first thing was like, well, I think you might be bipolar. And and I was like, I don't think I'm presenting any of the symptoms for bipolar. I'm telling you all these. And so it made me realize now in retrospect, so many people are told right at the get-go, you must be bipolar. So that must be the hot thing right now in psychology, in psychiatry. So I said, no, that's not the case. And he ran some initial blood work, and the blood work came back, and I was completely vitamin deficient, entirely. And these were main just blood serum tests. So I had scurvy, I had beriberi disease because I had no thiamine. I had B12 levels that were so insanely low that I'm surprised I was walking. Um, and vitamin D level of, I think, a 2, and it should be
Oh,
60 at least. So I was completely a third world starving, dying person, and no one had thought to test my vitamin levels. So I went back to my
mm.
main practitioner, and I said, "Hey, I got these blood results. I think it might have something to do with it." And once again, Stanford, Harvard trained woman said, "Oh no, those vitamins and minerals don't actually matter,
Oh
and
my
that couldn't be
gosh.
causing your symptoms." And I was like, so at that moment, I was like, something is seriously wrong here. At the same time, my sister was diagnosed with celiac disease because she was so stressed about my health that I think it finally triggered her natural genetic predisposition. And a new doctor I found said, I think you should try giving up gluten, because I'm seeing a lot of female patients who are feeling a lot better. In fact, to the point of reversing autoimmunity when they give up gluten. And so I said, okay, I'll try that. Well, between that and starting to replenish my vitamins, my life started coming back, and very quickly my body started to heal. and I couldn't believe it after all of, years of dealing with these pharmaceuticals and doctors. So I went to Columbia University because they have an absolutely outstanding celiac and gluten sensitivity center, and they're having a conference.
Hmm.
And they were having this conference to talk about what was creating the epidemic of non-celiac gluten sensitivity, because it's coming out of nowhere. They don't know, but a lot of people have it.
So I want to just stop you for 1 second because
Yeah.
I first of all, everything you've said is so like spot on with so many women that I
Oh,
speak to. And I think the most frustrating thing is so the doctors are trained one specific way. So I'm not going to call them all out on it, but they don't know any better because it's how they were trained. They haven't been trained from a whole body perspective. And I think that's where like change needs to happen there. It needs to be a marrying up between the two so that you're not looking at somebody for one particular thing. Because you know what? You might seem depressed, you might seem anxious, but who wouldn't when you've gone to 30 different people and you're getting nowhere and you're not feeling well? And I think when you go in with your list of symptoms, if you look at the majority of different titles they can give you, a lot of those same symptoms are cross spectrum. So then it's like, well, how do you know it's that, but not that? And how do you know it's that? And I think so many people go in with these long lists and they come out just like you did, frustrated, overwhelmed. I don't know what to do, you know. But I will say the one thing people forget to do is listen to your own body. Keep going. You have to keep marching forward until, and it sometimes is hard work, but God has you in a place for a reason, and you've got to keep digging to get to your own answer. Because for you, what worked might have been different for somebody else. But I do 100% believe that a lot of the autoimmune stuff does have to do with the stuff we're putting in our bodies. So I'm curious to see, you know, the
yeah.
next part of your journey.
Oh my gosh, and amen to that, because I think in what you're referencing here is not only do you have a gut feeling that something's wrong that you need to listen to, despite these experts telling you that you're crazy, but
Mm-hmm.
it is thinking about this holistic functional health model that I think should fully replace, at least integrative health should be replacing just mainstream, because it's a little bit of both sides.
Yep.
So I went to this Columbia conference, and a scientist stood up and he said, "We just don't understand it when you sterilize gluten and you give it to people that clearly have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So when you eat that, when a non-celiac gluten sensitive person eats something,
Mm-hmm.
then they get inflammatory markers in their blood if
Mm-hmm.
it has gluten. So it's like a real thing,
Sure.
not an imagined trend." So,
No, I have it, so I know.
oh
You're
yeah,
right.
okay. And he said, when you sterilize the gluten, you don't have the same response. Like the inflammatory markers are not as significant. So we need to
Hmm.
figure out what else is on the grain or what's going on. So I went up to the microphone and I asked the panel, is anything sprayed on the grain during farming? Are there any pesticides that are sprayed? And doctors turned around and looked at me and they're like, what? No,
Who are
they didn't
you?
spray things. Isn't this just interesting? It's another example of just a total disassociation from farming and health and food. And I mean, and so I felt really embarrassed, and I went and sat down because I didn't know anything about farming either. I was like, did I just ask something super stupid?
Uh-uh.
But afterwards, a scientist from General Mills came and found me, and he said, Roundup, the weed killer that you see in Home Depot. He didn't say that part, but for your audience, it's the same weed killer you see in Home Depot, is sprayed just before harvest on a lot of our grains.
Hmm.
And it's sprayed on harvest, and it's taken up into the grain itself and then sent to the mill, and you're eating it. So right now, any of us in the US could do a urine test, and 90% of us would be urinating out glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, because of this pre-harvest desiccation that they do. And they do this, the farmers aren't looking to poison us. What they do it so that they can dry out a field of grain or chickpeas. They do it with that too, very easily, and just do one pass with their combine. And it's just a much easier, less labor intensive way of harvesting. And
Hmm.
so this came
Interesting.
about in the late 90s. Actually, it was developed, first recognized in Scotland. And they're like, wow, this is easy. We just kill it all at once. Now we can harvest it all. And it doesn't matter if it rains or whatever, we're not going to be impacted by that. Unfortunately, 80% of our dietary exposure to Roundup and glyphosate, which is a huge public health problem is through this process of pre-harvest spraying. So that's where I discovered it. I said, oh my gosh, what is the deal with this glyphosate? Started digging like crazy into it. And at the same time, the cancer trials were starting in San Francisco that were trying to prove, the plaintiffs said that exposure to Roundup gave them non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And it was taking place in San Francisco. So I drove up there and I'm like, I'm going to go. And actually, I was going to go protest Monsanto, who manufactured Roundup. And there were no protesters. And I was weirded out because San Francisco historically has been a protest place, but it had been kept so quiet in the media that no one even knew it was happening. So I went up there, walked right into the courtroom, sat down with the lawyers, and I quit my other job that I was doing at the time. And I was like, I'm going to sit here every day. I'm going to write exactly what's happening in this courtroom because they're unveiling some really crooked stuff that otherwise no one's going to know. So I named myself Glyphosate Girl, and it took off from there. And now I really dedicate my life to trying to create public awareness around glyphosate and pesticides in general.
Isn't it so interesting? You know, as I sit and listen to all of that, which is an amazing story, and I'm glad you went on that journey because had you not been sick and had you not had the things, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing, and you're really impacting the lives of so many by what you do. And I hope that you know that every day when it's a rough day, that you're doing something for everybody who doesn't even know that you're doing it. So I think that's like the ghost, you know,
Yeah.
you're like the ghost person who's doing stuff for everybody, which is amazing. Um, I guess I should say angel, not ghost. But so one of the things though, as you're sitting there and you're writing, I mean, what year was that?
That was in 2018.
Okay, so 2018. So things had been going on. So, because to my knowledge, Roundup or glyphosate and Roundup and Monsanto, that was back in the 70s, right? That all kind of started being produced. And again, it wasn't ever done with ill intent at the beginning. And I really feel like that happens a lot of times. People are discovering something and they're like, wow, well, this will make this so much easier. But before we do that, we should really investigate a trial to see how does it impact one when they actually consume it. But they don't do that. They just see easier dollar bills, and that's all they go with. So, but 2018 wasn't that long ago, but people have had celiac, people have had gluten sensitivity. I was diagnosed back in like 2009, I think, with gluten sensitivity because, and I realized, I mean, when I don't eat it, I feel better. When I eat it, oh, it's like terrible. I get all these symptoms, I get all this craziness. And for my girls too. So it was kind of one of these rabbit hole things. But what I think floors me the most is we know now, we have the science, we have the people doing the testing, we have the humans that are experiencing the disease and the chronic illnesses. Why are we still in this state?
Oh my gosh, this is what drives me crazy. In fact, it drives me so crazy that some days I'm like, I'm done doing glyphosate things because it's so aggravating. Once you know what's going on and you realize how crooked the system is to keep these chemicals on our food, you can't believe that this is happening in the United States, actually. And
Yeah.
it's not in my United States that I grew up knowing and loving and trusting. And when you start to really dig behind, it's stunning how much the corporations own our regulators.
Mm.
I've now done several different visits to different regulators. So a meeting with the USDA, meeting with the FDA, several times with the EPA. And with the EPA, I went with this. I'm on the board of Moms Across America, which fights for non-toxic food. And so we went and we brought a bunch of scientists and doctors with us. And we presented this information to the Office of Pesticide Programs, which determines whether or not, for example, they're going to call Roundup a carcinogen, which they should, and they haven't. And after presenting with these experts, all this independent peer-reviewed research, they told us what we were presenting was just anecdotal. And then someone said at the very end, if you want any change, you're going to need to change who's over in the government. And so we
Mm-hmm.
went, we did a congressional briefing, and there were the same old people that are huge supporters of clean food, including Cory Booker, who helped get us in the door there. And we, it's falling on deaf ears because the momentum behind chemical agriculture is so massive at this point that our farm bill is entire, and that's something I never thought about, the farm bill. So it turns out that the farm bill is a really key piece of legislation that they pass every 5 years. And in that farm bill, they decide what type of agriculture they're going to be supporting. And now for decades, it's been this chemical agriculture to the point that smaller organic or regenerative farms don't fall in, if you don't fall in line with the spraying and the chemicals and the commodities like the GMO corn and the GMO soy, then you're out of luck. You're not going to get those subsidies that you get from the government. So farmers can't afford to grow anything but those things. You have these huge lobby groups and industry groups that absolutely are knocking on those doors every single day of our government and regulators and saying, you need to continue status quo because otherwise you're not going to get reelected. We're not giving money to your campaign. Or in the case of regulators, we're not going to get you some sweet job over at this agricultural chemical company where you're going to get this huge paycheck, which is how they bribe the regulators.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things that are keeping glyphosate on everyone's food. And behind that as well, there are these PR groups that I am stunned that they hire. I didn't know. I mean, I guess everything has PR and they're trying to sell a product, but it's a very aggressive PR campaign where they even in the court documents during the trial, we learned about all the campaigns that they have, include the Let Nothing Go campaign. And what that is on social media, you will have people that are hired by Monsanto and they will wait for someone like me to post about glyphosate or one of their products or GMOs. And then they will completely counter everything you say and tell you you're anti-science. And this
Mm-hmm.
person doesn't know what they're talking about. Look at the regulators know what's real, trust them, to the point that it really, and they will go in, and there was an article in Forbes that was ghostwritten by Monsanto, but published by a really esteemed scientist that's in the Hoover Institute at Stanford. And he was willing to be paid to put his name on this article to support Roundup. So that's what we're up against, is just so much money in this huge world of lobbying and pressure.
Yeah. And again, as you're speaking all of that, everything that you say is all money based.
All
And
money.
it's all money and it's so greedy and it's so disgusting. And, the weird, crazy question I would have for those people that are on those boards of the different places, do you eat that food? And have you been sick? Or what are you doing behind the scenes? Because who in their right mind, if they actually know what they're doing, which they have to know at this point. Now, I feel like, again, it's like the cat's out of the bag. Like there's enough evidence, there's enough people that have gone to court to sue. There's lots of things out there now. So it is falling on deaf ears because they're being blind to it. They're not actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. And again, like you say, growing up in America, feeling like you should be able to trust people who have your best interests, right? Who is that exactly aside from yourself and God? It's like, not very many
Absolutely.
people. And
No.
I don't know. And so I think to get a mom angry is is the best way to make change. To have an angry mom, right? Moms get stuff done because when it comes to their children, when something happens to their children, you better watch out, So
Oh yeah.
most of the people that sit on these boards, I'm not going to say all because I don't know exactly, but I would have to assume a large percent are men. And what I do know for a fact is they sit on each other's boards. Well, again, that shouldn't be legal. There should be some kind of a policy in place that you are not allowed to sit on other people's boards within your same industry, because what does that do? It's just, I'm going to scratch your back here, you'll scratch mine, and that's exactly what's happening here. And if Monsanto has such a hold, right, and such power, which we had a bunch years ago, when you were talking about how you went to the march or whatever, we had a huge march down in Orlando, and it was all about Monsanto. So that
Oh,
is one
nice.
thing Florida had done.
Yeah.
But, I think there's two things that can happen. We can get super like, oh, what am I going to be able to do? Right? Like, how am I going to be one little person who makes the change? Or we can all be a little more like you, a little more like angry moms, a little more about and start talking. Once people talk and get educated, it really does come back to you. Once you know something, then you have the choice how you purchase. If more people purchase a certain way, we can get people's heads turning. But the more that we keep supporting by spending our hard-earned dollars on sickness and crap, the more that we're never going to get anywhere. So unfortunately, lots of people don't even know what it is, right? They know about Roundup because they spray it on the weeds outside, but they don't know that part of that chemical that's in there is glyphosate and what it can actually do. So for people who, again, if this is your first time being introduced to this, welcome to the world of, I don't even know what you want to call it. But I do want people to be able to make a connection. So in your research that you've done, I know we talked about a couple of different illnesses and things, but could you give a small list of things that when you consume too much glyphosate, which this is another loophole because there's lots of loopholes. So if anybody doesn't know this yet, this will also be something you can take away from this episode. There's a lot of loopholes in our government, in our food industry, that and product industry that allows companies to do shady things. That's what I call it, because it's like, fragrance is a shady thing, natural flavors is a shady, like there are things that, we have given to they have given to companies so they can put a bunch of stuff in it and not have to list it on the label. So I think that's the first change that needs to happen. Like honesty on the label matters. And so then people can, because again, we can't expect people to make good choices if there's not transparency. So I think transparency is the first thing. And I talk a lot about ingredients with anybody who listens knows that when they say, is this healthy? It says this on front. I'm like, I don't know. I would have to see, show me the ingredients. And then the minute I see ingredients, I know, no, this would not be healthy because the front is greenwashing. It's going to get you in the door to buy something that they're going to claim as healthy, but it might not be. So if you
Oh
would
my
talk,
gosh. Yeah, on that note, I went to the Natural Products Expo, which is a
oh,
huge
I wanted
conference.
to go to, I'm going next year. I was like,
You need to go. You absolutely have to go when you're
I
talking about
didn't,
these ingredients because a
oh,
lot is not natural there.
no, I saw that. So when I saw the expo, I was like, how did I not know about this? And I reached out to my friend and she's like, it's like Christmas. And I was like, I know. And I said,
Yeah,
however,
but it's not.
I'm like, wait a second, there's this there. And I know for a fact that's not healthy. So then I'm like, here we are again. It's like, you got to decipher. So whoever's running that, I would love to encourage them to really do diligence on accepting people into there. Because again, some consumers going there and be like, well, if they're there, they must be healthy.
For sure. And then Impossible Burger, which I have a huge issue with because it's a chemical
Huge,
bomb, is sitting there
huge.
in the center of the courtyard serving up like all these burgers to people. And I see this long line of people, and I just wanted to go and tap them each on the shoulder and say, don't do it. Your body doesn't need this junk.
Right. It is crazy. Yeah, that was one of the ones that I was just like, really? Like, how did they make it in there?
Oh, money again.
Funny. Yeah. There was a documentary on Netflix, and it was about eating vegan versus eating plant or meat or whatever. And it was twins. It was based on twins. So they took twins and they separated each twin pair, and one did vegan, one did whatever. Well, then I found out the whole thing was done by Impossible Burger, or what's the other burger? There's another
Yeah,
burger.
Beyond Meat.
Yeah, I think it was Beyond. One of the two. But I just thought at the end, I was like, well, there goes that. That none of that
Oh
even,
gosh.
like, I should have looked at that first because I just wasted an hour of my time.
Totally.
Okay, so let's go back because I do want people to be able to relate in a more concrete way. When you consume too much,
Mhm.
what are some of the diseases, chronic illnesses that people could potentially have and not know that that's maybe a reason?
Yeah. So eating glyphosate one time isn't going to have these effects. So the difference is if you're eating it every day for years and years and years, that's where it starts to become a problem. And all of us are, because once again, this chemical is in all of our non-organic food. It's in the water, it's in the air, it's in our personal products like any cotton that's non-organic. So if you're using pads and tampons, that will have glyphosate in it. So it's really everywhere. So you can't avoid it. When you look at this huge body of research, there is an enormous body, and you could go yourself to a website called PubMed,
Oh
and
yeah, I love PubMed.
that is a database of really all of the independent peer-reviewed research that's out there that's medical. And it is so fascinating. And this is where I started getting my evidence. And You go in, and so peer-reviewed, independent is important because this means that peers that are other, say, toxicologists in the case of glyphosate, they're scientists, and they'll read it and they'll give feedback to the scientist who wrote it, and then there's sort of a back and forth. Well, I don't understand this. This doesn't seem right. And then finally, an academic journal, will publish it.
Okay.
And independent meaning it's not funded by industry. So you can
Correct.
go and you can find these papers. And if you put in glyphosate, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of really solid independent research talking about the wide variety of effects of chronic exposure to glyphosate. And it crosses all kinds of different body systems, and it's not unlike the illnesses that we're all experiencing, right?
Hmm.
I'll just start with the gut because that's so key, I think, in our healing. Monsanto originally claimed that this chemical did not impact humans, only plants, because of a specific enzyme that it works on in its herbicidal activity that's only present in plants. But what they didn't note is that it's also present in bacteria. And of course, now we know about our microbiome.
Hmm.
And so our microbiome is made up of an immense number of different bacteria. Well, so microbiologists went in, they started studying, and they said, this isn't great because it probably has a killing effect on some of our microbiota. So they do this, and they found that glyphosate specifically works. It's actually patented now by Monsanto as an antimicrobial because of this. So you're eating this antibiotic each day. It specifically selects the beneficial bacteria, gut bacteria, like the lactobacillus. It goes in and it will kill those bacteria. It allows the more pathogenic bacteria to proliferate. So this is an antibiotic that only is attacking your good gut bacteria. That is shutting down so much of the way your body operates when your gut is dysbiotic like that.
Hmm.
And it translates to all kinds of things, including look at the big anxiety and depression epidemic. And not saying this is the only thing contributing, but it has a real, very real biological effect on serotonin production downstream. So that's a huge issue. So we start with that, and it also contributes to the condition leaky gut, which you probably talked about. And that's where it is allowing different toxins into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there, and it can launch the autoimmune cascade. So then we go on beyond that. It's a really significant endocrine disruptor, meaning that it messes with our hormones quite a bit. So you've seen so much in terms of hormone disruption. And certainly, once again, it's not just glyphosate, it's also plastics and other things. But glyphosate being the most widely used pesticide of all time on this planet that we are all exposed to brings it to the forefront. But its impact on endocrine systems is really terrifying. It definitely is contributing to infertility. It can contribute to preterm birth. I actually ran some studies myself because I saw in studies that it actually kills sperm. So I wondered if it could get past the blood testes barrier. So I sent in a bunch of semen samples, and indeed glyphosate was present in the semen, and
Mm.
we know what it does there. So it's killing off semen. It can mess in utero with the development of the female fetuses. It can stop the implantation of the embryos into the side of the uterus. So the list of things is so incredibly long. That's not even getting into cancer yet. So it's
Mhm.
highly connected to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's a contributor to breast cancer. It contributes to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which right now is through the roof, including in children. It's a huge contributor to that. It contributes to kidney disease. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, so now it's connected to all kinds of different conditions, including Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
That the fact that these chemicals are able to break through that barrier that is so critical to, obviously the barrier is there for a reason, but it can get right on past it. So the list of things that never fail to amaze me. Another study came out relatively recently that was showing that they were measuring the second trimester levels of urine in pregnant women, and the higher the level, then they looked at the fetuses. in female fetuses, the people with the higher levels during pregnancy of glyphosate in their urine, the female fetuses had a change distance between the vagina and the anus because it was androgenizing the babies very slowly because of the hormonal changes in the babies. So it was masculinizing the female fetuses. That is, I feel like that should stop the presses, because what that is that's end of species. And that
Mhm.
sounds so dramatic when I say that, but actually that's what that is. That's saying
It's altering.
it's altering, and it's nature saying you should not be able to procreate anymore because look at this toxic environment. It's not hospitable to life. And that is what really terrifies me with a lot. I saw a recent study too that came
Mm,
out that estrogen levels in teenagers are
crazy.
significantly impacted by glyphosate exposure. They tested the urine levels and then the serum levels of estrogen, and it messed with it. And so I see these things and I think, how on earth is this quiet? Because there are
Right.
so many people that are struggling. And I mean, as I feel so fortunate that I was able to get pregnant and that I can be a mom, I'm really scared about all of our kids' ability to have kids, because every
Mhm.
single day that this chemical and other pesticides are sprayed, the less likely it is that they're going to be able to have babies. Right now, it's 11% of women that are infertile in childbearing years, and it's 9% of men. That's a
Yeah.
large, large number.
That is a large number. And one thing you just said, and but I got to go back to the other things you just said, it's one of the pesticides because it is not the only pesticide. So again, we may not be able to control everything that we do, but the things that we do have in our control, we should be at least entertaining, not only for yourself, but for your children if you have children, because again, our kids don't know better. I will say though, this generation I feel like is going to have a bigger voice than our generation. And I don't know if it's because they've grown up with social media. I don't know if they're just kind of, I know they get the label of being entitled. I don't know what it is, but I feel like the kids that I've met that are passionate about something, that have, been their eyes open to something, they are already trying to use their voice and make change. So I do feel comfortable and confident and hopeful they will come along, because eventually these people that are up here doing all the things, they're going to have to be replaced at some point when their life is taken. So, it's like maybe that's when the big change will happen. But again, until we get there, we have to get a masses together to make a large voice, I guess. But
Yeah.
the list of different things you were talking about, it's so interesting because, gut and microbiomes, kind of a newer thing. It's not a fad. It's just that we didn't have the understanding or the scientific research behind it until the last decade or so, maybe a little longer, but somewhere in there. It wasn't back from like the 50s and we knew all about it. We didn't. So it's not a buzzword. It is real. It is true. And what we do in how we ingest things and what we ingest does affect our microbiome. But the craziest thing is your microbiome and your brain are connected. There's, that interconnected highway thing that's going, and your gut talks to your brain and your brain talks to your gut. And that's why when you are ingesting a lot of glyphosate or things that have extra pesticides and you're killing the good bacteria, and then that's depleting your serotonin, then you also have a bigger problem because then your neurotransmitters are off. So not only are you dealing with gut permeability and all the bloating and your inflammation numbers, you're now messing with your brain and the chemicals that are coming from your brain. And so there's a very large disconnect. And if glyphosate is one of the things that is part of the problem, right? When someone goes to a physician, even an integrative, and they say, here, get on a probiotic. Yes, a probiotic's great because you're going to get the friendly bacteria, the commensal and all of that. But if you're doing that and you're still eating glyphosate, what it's like you're just throwing money down the toilet. It's like because you're putting better in and then you're getting it taken out because of your lifestyle. So I tell people whenever they're going to try to get their health more balanced, it's not a one part show, it's an all show. And so you're going to do this, but at the same time you're doing this, you also have to be doing a multitude of things over here to balance it out, because otherwise you're just spending money on supplements and things. And there's so many people that have vitamin D deficiency. There's so many people. Something that I learned, and again, this is great knowledge to know if you didn't know, your B vitamins, if you have a particular gene, you have to have methylated B vitamins. And I can't remember, there's a specific term for it. But my
It would be
daughter,
MTHFR.
yes, thank you.
That's
Yes.
because I have
So,
it.
okay, so do I. And I did not know. And one of my daughters has it. But the very interesting thing as I researched it was that when you take folate or folic acid, one or the two, and when you're pregnant, they give it to you, right? They're like, oh, you must take this multivitamin or whatever, and then take this for the folic acid. I think it was folate. I don't know exactly which one, but one of the two.
Yeah, yeah, they tell you to take the folic acid, which if you have that variation is horrible.
It is. It can cause miscarriages, and I
Yeah.
had 3 of them. So I was like, wow, like holy moly, was like that a contributing factor, and
Yeah.
nobody knew that. And it's crazy. And I didn't know about glyphosate and sperm count and all that, but it's just, it's so deep rooted. So again, we're not here trying to overwhelm you. We're just really trying to educate. I'm trying to turn some light bulbs on, because, a lot of people live with the mentality, I eat in moderation, I do this in moderation. And yes, you know what? If you eat a little bit, it isn't going to hurt you. But if you really thought about all the things that it's on and in and what you do on a daily basis, I know for a fact that women put 250 plus chemicals on their bodies before they walk out, that they touch, they're in contact with, because of all the things that we do, what we put all over our body, what we put on our laundry, on our clothing, all the things, it all matters. So, but in the sheer, not overwhelm anybody, with the 1% shift in mind, you can't change everything overnight. So it's starting someplace that feels aligned to you and taking that first step. And what that first step for you might be different, than what it would look like for another person. But I want you guys to leave today thinking, right? Get your thinking caps on, where can you make an adjustment? If that is, looking at what you have in your pantry, and if those things are sprayed heavily, if they are not organic, and or they're corn, soy, all of those things, what are the biggest crops? I think it's corn, soy, wheat.
It's corn. Corn is okay if it's not organic. I mean, if it is organic, not if it's not.
Correct.
The the main things are going to be the oatmeal, wheat, sugar cane, but you're probably not going to eat tons of sugar. That's like a teaspoon of it, but that's something that's pre-harvest sprayed. Uh, some alcohol, like some wines will have high levels because of using in the orchard. Same with nuts, because
Okay.
when you spray the weeds, which they don't need to do, but most farmers do, around the base of the tree, the glyphosate's picked up and brought through into the nuts themselves. So that's a problem. Chickpeas tend to have the very, very highest. So if you're going to be eating hummus, don't eat like just don't have hummus, period, if it is not organic. That is
Okay.
something that's just like, don't, like if you see it at a party, it's not organic. That is going to be such a heavy load of glyphosate that that's something that I always look and think, no way. And then I feel really sad when I see women who aren't feeling great sitting there thinking, well, I'm just having this healthy hummus, right? This isn't highly processed. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
I
that is
never actually
like,
thought about the glyphosate, but I always look at the oils, if it just to see what kind of oils they use, because I
oh yeah,
always,
well, I mean that too, right? That's an issue.
it is, but I've never actually thought of it being, I'm pretty sure we only eat organic, but now I'm going to have to really, pay more attention. Um, Again, if you're not somebody who has like a whole organic household quite yet, you know, you've got to make just small shifts at first. And, the things that will matter, especially if you don't feel good, right? Even if you do feel good, you still need to make the shifts, because you don't want to get to not feeling good. But if you don't feel good and you haven't gotten answers and you're struggling, this is something to try. And, you have to be experimental with yourself and try on different things. And just like one person just mentioned to you, like, oh, maybe get your vitamins checked, but also, maybe go gluten free, because I see people, nobody knew for a fact that that was something. They just kind of heard it, right? So not everything always has to have backed scientific literature experiment. It's not like you're shooting cocaine.
Yeah.
Like experiment, take things out, eliminate things, add things back. Your body will tell you. Your body is so wise. It's so much wiser than we give it credit for.
Oh
So,
my gosh. And you're so right. It does tell you. And another thing on going gluten free, what I've noticed, so I've done some health coaching, and what I have noticed is that a lot of people will say, yeah, I eat very
gluten.
little gluten. I'm light on gluten. And the problem is every single time that you're consuming gluten, it sets you back at least 2 weeks.
Right, 100%.
And so you
And
have to go all in,
it
like
is. It's an all in
no
for
gluten.
30 days to feel anything. And then once you start feeling better and you have it, you're not going to feel good. And you're going to recognize that that would be the bigger problem. And it will take a couple of weeks to get back on that, feeling better path. But
Yeah.
I will say that what I notice about people, because they're doing the best they can, right? They say, oh, yeah, I'm gluten free. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just kind of go over what do you consume because that matters. And all of the gimmicky gluten-free stuff, kind of like the fat-free fad back in the
Well,
day.
yeah,
It's like, well,
same
I can
thing.
eat the whole thing of I mean, this is back in college. We're like, yeah, get the Snackwells. Like, we can eat all the
Oh
cookies, and
yeah.
it's like 2 calories, and like, yeah, we can go out and then we can eat. It's like, what? So the gluten-free has become the same thing. So again, you have to be the controller of your control and realize that people are going to market and gimmick, and they're going to market to people that are looking, and they don't always have your best interest. So make sure you're always looking for things that are fueling your body and not destroying it. And a lot of the quote unquote, gluten-free processed items
Oh my
are
gosh.
just
It's
replaced
terrible.
with other garbage chemicals. So
In fact, in some cases, I look and I think that these processed, I'm thinking about, I don't remember the name, but the chocolate covered um, gluten-free pretzels. And I look at that and it's such junk. It's so
oh,
bad.
glutino,
Yeah.
that's one of them. Mhm.
And I'm like, actually it would be, I feel sad for myself that I'm gluten-free because I know that there are healthier alternatives that have gluten in them. So gluten-free does not necessarily mean healthier at all.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. So it's always, I think if people can think of eating like whole foods, real foods, one ingredient, there are some people that are doing the right thing. I think Siete so far is doing an amazing job. I think that she really comes from a different mindset and what she's creating. I did order a couple of things from the market when I was looking at the expo, and I saw different brands, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to order. So I told my husband, I'm ordering the most expensive ice cream. I don't know what it is, but it's like $60. We're getting 3 of them because I got to try all these things to tell people. Well, it turned
Totally.
out it was doughy. So it was cookie dough. I don't know what I thought. I thought it was ice cream. But
Oh,
anyways,
well.
it's got like 5 ingredients in it. I'm like, they're doing it right.
Oh
So
my gosh, that's what you need. Oh, totally.
yeah, and
That's
you
so
just,
unusual.
it is very unusual, but I try to help people because I get a lot of, well, what can I swap that with? I don't want to give it up. What can I swap it? And it's like, well, I have learned that you can make stuff really taste good with less ingredients and really healthy. So why would you get a list this long when you could have a list, this long? Um,
Absolutely.
so, all right, really quick because I know we've been on a long time, but you we talked a little bit about Monsanto, we talked about GMOs, but I don't know that everybody understands exactly what a GMO is. So, if you could share from your wisdom and your education side what it is,
Yeah.
because
And my history, I think maybe because I live in California or something, I used to be really annoyed with the GMO activists because I'm like, genetic modification, that's great. That's so brilliant, like pro science,
yeah.
So and you hear their lines that, oh, this is great. This is how we're going to feed the world. We're going to feed this growing population with GMOs. That's the only way we can do it. We can't do it any other way. And so they came out in the 1990s with these genetically modified seeds. And they developed them, Monsanto did, because they were going to be able to sell a lot more chemicals in part with as a whole system with GMO seeds. So genetically modified seeds were made to be resistant to the effects of Roundup. And they came out originally with the soy and the corn and the cotton. And farmers could plant the seeds. They could spray Roundup on top of the crops and kill all the weeds around them, and the plants wouldn't die, which was revolutionary.
Hmm.
And so then you saw this agribusiness starting to take over our heartland in the United States and in Canada too, just take it over as they were planting it, that they had the system, the Roundup Ready system, it's called. So now we have, and if you ever have a chance to drive through the Midwest, you will be shocked because this is all, I mean, it is literally all there is around. Like you just see these fields and fields and miles and miles and miles of this corn and soy, corn and soy, corn and soy. And so you wonder, well, who's eating this? Who's eating it is primarily the cattle
cattle.
that and pigs that are in these confined factories, and it's so heartbreaking and so sickly. And I've had the opportunity to go and see some very sick cows in one of them that were fed this garbage. So it primarily goes to animal feed, and then the corn is also used in ethanol, which you will see at your gas tank. Sometimes it'll say 10% ethanol. That's from GMO corn. And that's
Hmm.
because the government said, oh, if we're subsidizing all of these commodity GMO farmers, then we need to have a lot of buyers on the other end. So let's pop that in there into the gas now that people will use. So that is primarily what GMOs are. In terms of what we are eating, it is in the processed foods. So it's the high fructose corn syrup. And I drove by one of the GMO processing centers that is in Southern Illinois, and this thing stinks so horribly. It is so toxic smelling all around this factory where they're doing this processing to create these things
Mm.
like the soy, lecithin, and all that. And it's not anything you want to eat at all. And right now there's a big argument because Mexico has finally said, we're not going to eat your GMOs. We're not going to be buying them anymore here. We're banning them. And
Good.
and then the US came out swinging and said, no way, you're not going to. You can't show us the science that there's a problem. There's no science that says there's a problem. Meanwhile, there's so much science that shows what a problem these GMOs are.
Well, I
And
hope
so
that
they
Mexico can dig up some science to
well,
show
and
and
they
prove.
did, and they
Oh,
sent
good.
200 pages back to the United States and said, "See, this is why, because we care about the health of people, so we're not going to bring it anymore."
I love that. Maybe I'll move to Mexico.
I know, me too.
I was just thinking about all the things, that we've been saying today, and I was thinking when you're looking at your ingredient lists, because maybe you look for something different than I look, because I have like a 5 hand that I'm like, avoid these things. What are some of the things, like when you flip around a processed box of something, what do you look for?
I am looking, just as you said earlier, for just the least amount of ingredients, and some things I will give on. I don't like a lot of gums in my
Hmm.
food, and unfortunately, they're in a lot of gluten-free things,
Hmm.
but I know that they upset my stomach. I mean, and this comes second after, first and foremost, I'm looking to see if it's organic, like first and foremost. But even some organic things have other ingredients that
Yep.
aren't great. For example,
Correct.
these gums. And sometimes you'll see different flavorings that are kind of questionable. And in the case of apples and avocados, the coating appeal can be put on it, and that is not great. And unfortunately, it isn't labeled always. In Whole Foods, oftentimes their apples are usually sprayed with a peel, but then not so at Trader Joe's or Costco. So that's something. So I'm really looking for that. If it is not organic, then as I said, I stay away from chickpeas, and and this doesn't have anything to do with glyphosate, but I'm very cautious around artificial dyes and colors because
You
I
don't do
think
that.
they're a neurological toxin.
My daughter, my younger daughter, she red dye, I knew something was up when she was like 2, 3. This has been before I even knew like that was in our food, that I wasn't educated at that time. But I would tell my husband, like, she cannot, something to do with this, whatever she eats this, and it has, I know I see now it has red, blue, and whatever. And I was like, she gets like the Tasmanian devil and she cannot help it. Like, it's literally like something she can't control. And he was like, that's silly. It's just because we went to a birthday party and she had whatever. And I was like, okay, you're taking her to the next party. And if you give her a cupcake, then you're going to be with her the rest of the day, seeing what I see. I'm with her a lot of the time, so it's like, and he did, and he was like, oh my gosh, like she's never allowed to have red dye again. And I'm
Oh my
like,
gosh, this was
exactly.
exactly the same with my son. Exactly the same. It was a
Crazy.
horror.
Or, and for most of the people that just go to your regular pediatrician, they'd be like, oh, they're ADD, here you go.
Yes, for
And
real.
so
You go into the school
that
and they're serving it up. You're
Yeah,
like,
they're
what?
serving it up at school. I mean, that's a whole nother thing that I would love
Yeah.
to get involved in is like the food at school because
Oh
it's
my
like we
gosh.
want our kids to think their best and behave their best, yet we serve them crap for
They
breakfast. And a
can't.
lot of them eat breakfast and lunch there because and they're on free and reduced lunch. This is the only nourishment they get. And then you guys feed them garbage, so it's
Completely.
very infuriating. Um, so what I've heard, and again, you can correct me, is that even if it's organic, that means that it could be 95% organic.
Yes.
Doesn't mean it doesn't mean it's all organic. So that's why I tell people, even though it says organic, yes, you want to look for that label, but you want to also see if it says non-GMOs. Most of the time, if it is organic, it means that. But when they double duty it, I feel a little better. But then still, you got to read your ingredients because, like you said, the lecithins, the guar gum, those things, they're not like the best thing. They're not the most horrible. And if you're going to have moderation and balance, that might be something. But what do you know about that? Is that true, accurate?
Yeah, and another thing about organic is that a lot of times it isn't actually that nutrient dense because their farming practices are not necessarily regenerative, which means that the soil is healthy and is full of nutrients and then the crops pick it up. That's not always the case. And there are different bodies of organic, there are organic factories practically that like Driscoll's berries is one where they're not growing according to practices that will lead to the most nutrient dense products. And and so that's its own thing. So the gold standard in terms of what the highest quality that you're ever going to be able to purchase is regenerative organic. And unfortunately, right now, this is a very tiny, tiny part of the market, but it's what I actually am working on every day now with a team called Regenified. And we are trying to get the measurements in place, first of all, to show how much more nutrient dense and how much lower the pesticide residue is according to what the farming practices are. Like if he's healed the soil in the biome
Mm-hmm.
in the soil, we
Yep.
can likely do the same in ourselves. And so I think that
100%.
that's
You
the
know
future.
Dr. Bush, right? I would
Yes,
imagine.
yeah,
Yeah. He's amazing. And I found him probably like 2019. And I've been just listening to him on podcasts and just reading his literature and his footprint and all the things he's doing. And um yeah, he's definitely on to the right, I feel like the right track. And
yeah.
I do, again, it's probably just because I live in the world, but I do hear a lot about regen farming and what it actually does. And that's a whole nother conversation. But I
You'll have
am
to have me
very
back for that one because
at
I can talk for an
100%.
hour.
No, I no 100%. I'm totally having you back because that is very it's new for me and it's very enlightening.
And it's new to
And
everyone. This is like
it's
in the last few years.
it's he's been like working. It's interesting. Most people that I run into that have kind of evolved to the other side have been on the other side. And so I love to hear their stories about how they and what they did and then kind of how they've moved over because of their experiences. And so I'm fascinated with people like that because I feel like, okay, you got this education and you have this experience. So now you're bringing it to the other side. And I feel like that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
Um, he's pretty wild, I think, in some of his things, but I think he's very knowledgeable and educated and he's really cool to listen to. But regen farming is a whole nother conversation. So I will have you back on for sure because that is something that is up and coming, but it is very important. But one thing I wanted to say, listening to this conversation and just kind of backtracking a minute, I think when they started to separate farm into pigs here, chickens here, um, and made them more that way rather than the way that natural farms used to be, where everybody lives on the same farm and grows things because they all have a hand in something, right? It's not like when God made farming, made animals, made all the things, he didn't say, okay, cows, you're living over here and this factory farm, and pigs, you're over here, and then carrots are being grown here. It was a garden, right? It was a farm garden. So
Totally
everything was
integrate.
together. Right. And but the first separating that out was the first problem because then that just invited in there's no manure, there's no, bugs aren't eating the other things. It took out the whole like ecosystem basically and just separated it out. And so that's where the huge problem started. And then what can we do to fix this? What can we do to, now let's feed the cows all of this corn and soy and then who's ingesting that? The people eating it, right? So then that's why for meat and all of that, it's super important to make sure your meat is grown ethically.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. That's a huge,
more huge. And
I
so
will
you
not
got,
touch. I
yeah.
will not touch meat that has not been ethically and cleanly sourced. And I just, to the point that even there's a scientist who is very into cortisol levels, and just, what that does to the animal's cortisol levels living in that kind of confinement is just, it's so sad. It's
And then
terrible.
you're eating it.
You're eating it with
Yeah.
those hormones.
Yeah. It's crazy. And again, I know it seems kind of like, how is that possible? But whatever the cow eats, however the cow is treated, that is what you're eating. It's energy based.
Yeah,
So how they're
it is.
killed is important. How their life is taken. Are they stressed? Are they not stressed? Like, because you're ingesting all of their stuff. So it's just like when a mom has a baby, it's like whatever state their mother was in, a lot of times it's passed on to the baby in the environment, because that's what well, not epigenetics, that's what genetics is. And then epigenetics is the thing, that is the things we do have a little bit more control over. So that's where we need to focus, because you can't always
Yes,
focus on.
what we were given.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that. So, all right. Well, before we go, thank you so much. First of all, this has been just an amazing conversation, and I'm taking away so much, and I know my audience will too. And I'll have to go back and listen to get the real big takeaways. But, um, what you do is not just for yourself. So I hope that you still give yourself self-care. I hope that you still have non-negotiables for yourself so that you can keep your best wellness, because your job is brutal, I'm sure, on some days. So what are a couple of non-negotiables you've created that you do on a daily basis to keep yourself in check?
One thing that is really important to me is the water that I'm drinking.
Okay.
And it's very important to me to have it be filtered. Also,
Mhm.
when I'm showering, and that's like simple adjustments. That's just an under the counter water filter, and then in my showers, just on the shower head.
Yeah.
And I feel really, really good about that. The other thing that I do, and I'm not a highly religious person um, at all, and I grew up like Catholic and sort of, but something that's very important to me is um, is at least every other day to be doing a meditation of some kind, where it's just a calmness in my head to recenter. Because as you're saying, it's almost like I'm at war quite a bit, and that's not very peaceful. And
Mhm.
so when I can get out of myself and into a different mentality, I find that just an extremely just peaceful place to go and visit, and where everything's calm, and you remember um, how beautiful nature is and why we all should be protecting it so much.
Mhm. I love that. That's great. And those are free. Well, that's free. And then the
The
water
filter too.
thing,
Yeah,
the
the
filter
filter's
is
worth
not
it.
free, but it's worth because if you think about, everybody, oh, hydration, hydration, hydration. Well, hydration's great, but then also our water is depleted of a lot, or it has a lot of yuck in it. And so you want to get rid of the yuck and keep the good. And then I'm also a believer in um, some electrolytes some added minerals, because pretty much everybody's mineral deficient. I did want to ask, if somebody was curious and wanted to get their glyphosate level checked. I'm sure that's integrative or functional, but what kind of a test is that?
Well, you can also do it without a doctor. So you can send a sample into
Oh,
a company called HRI Labs, HRI.
okay.
It's run by Dr. John Fagan, who is a scientist, and he tests a lot of different things, including food. So if you had a food item that you eat all the time, you want to have tested. Sometimes it's
Hmm.
not the cheapest thing in the world, but if you're curious and you can afford it, then sending it off to him. But you can do a urine, or you can send in a hair sample, and they can test your glyphosate levels in that, because of course it accumulates. Um,
Yeah,
and and so yeah, you can just go online and get information with that.
that's great. So then you don't even have to go find a doctor. You can easily just order it online and do it yourself. I think that's great. So again, if
You have to find a
you're
doctor who will say, "Why would you test that?" Because you don't need
right,
that gaslighting.
that doesn't matter. You're fine. You're fine.
You're fine. Go
You're
ahead, go
fine.
to antidepressant.
That's right. Exactly. Well, I hope that as people walk away today, they're feeling hopeful. They're feeling like they can empower, or they have the empowerment to take some steps forward on their own and start to really, learn, because when you learn something, you cannot unlearn it.
Yeah,
So that's my whole mission in life, is to teach, because once somebody knows something, they can make better choices for themselves. It's not that I think we're conditioned to have other people make these choices and decisions for us, but we need to kind of change that and pivot to where we feel like we have the control of knowing what to do for ourselves to help ourselves. Um, Again, I'm not discounting doctors because they're great for some things, but there's a lot of people run into a lot of dead ends. So, all right, well, I'm going to let everybody go because we, again, could be talking probably for the next 5 hours. And I hope everybody has an amazing day, rest of the week, and I will talk to you guys next week. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.